Love, that ever-flowing liquid fire of light, ever-expanding and illuminating truth, which is always revealed with wisdom, a spiritual nutrient necessary for vitality that is maintained through selflessness, a filter of ether that aids purity, which is love. Love, a limitless paper lantern floating into infinity on the intentions and actions of initiates of the mysteries. All right, welcome everybody. We have Dalien with us today. Dalien, how you doing, bro?
Good. Thanks for having me, Ross. I am excited to be here, man. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, thanks for coming on, man. I'm excited to get to talk with you more. We talked a little bit before this, and it's been a really good conversation so far.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd like to start off asking people what they're grateful for in this moment. What are you grateful for today, Dalien?
Mm-hmm. Well, right now I am especially grateful for this opportunity, Ross, to really have this conversation with you. But I'm, I suppose, grateful for the whole of it, whatever I can comprehend, sort of apprehend of life in general. Because it is this kind of big, overwhelming, at times scary thing. But I am mostly right now, I think, flowing with the awesome, magical sort of side of it. So I'm grateful for that for sure.
Absolutely. It's a lot easier to go with the flow than it is to be pushed along by it unwillingly.
Yes, and having your butt kicked by the rocks exactly as you get whipped about by the current. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. No,
Much better than just swimming. Yeah, downstream.
I always like the Alan Watts thing where he talks about like when you're going with the flow and you're like facing the way that the water is flowing, you can direct which way you want to go. When you're in the other way, you're getting a mouthful of water and bouncing off whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you also mentioned another thing that I love. Alan Watts is someone who I really should just dive into whatever he's got out there as far as like talks and books and videos, anything I can get my hands on. I really love his points of view, and he's awesome. But somehow I didn't even know about him really until only a few years ago. So I don't know how that's possible, but
Yeah, I've really enjoyed all his stuff that I've listened to. I like it because he like has all these paradoxes, and I find so much truth in paradoxes, and he has so much humor. And I find that like most of the things that really have helped me the most are like humorous paradoxes and realizing how complicated I make things.
I guess you really got to the core of I guess what I was trying to say there, though, because that is what he's got that's really awesome, is this way of exactly giving you these parables and these examples that are very sort of down to earth but have a lot of profound wisdom in them, and he'll make him funny. Yeah, exactly. He'll inject his, I suppose you could call it, slightly British, dry, sardonic humor, which happen to find very much like myself. But yeah, he's just a great blend of the deep wisdom with the anecdotes and the humor and all of that. So.
Yeah, he's so enjoyable to listen to. What quotes do you feel most moved by, and what do they mean to you?
The one quote that when I saw this question, I just thought of the one that I guess it's like a Maya Angelou kind of quote, maybe part of like a larger thing that she said, but she essentially said, people will forget what you said and did, but they'll remember, how you made them feel. And that just drove this point home for me, when she said it in such simple words, the whole sort of energetic side of life, the fact that, so much of what we experience is really energy, right? And emotion, like you were saying, before we started recording here, the nonverbal dimension of our, experience and interaction. That was just her putting it in words, the whole nonverbal side, putting it in beautiful words. And it was just like, boom, chew on that quote for a few years and see what you can make of that. So, yeah.
That's very beautiful. I like that.
Yeah, it's one that I think will stick with me. And of course, being part of the whole Positive Head thing, we've had a plethora of really awesome quotes to chew on, really. But that's one that just like always, has stuck around with me. So.
Yeah, I look at quotes like every day now. I put like 2 quotes out a day or whatever or more for my different feeds. And it's so awesome to find how people are able to crystallize such deep, expansive concepts into so few words. Like, that boggles my mind. Have you ever read any Kerouac?
No, Kerouac is actually someone. I suppose I might like him because he's one of the quintessential beat poets, right?
Hmm.
But no, for some reason I haven't gotten into. Was he contemporary with Allen Ginsberg as well, or am
Yeah,
I?
they used to hang around. He actually was like good friends with them, and they hung out with I can't think of the guy who wrote Junkie. I can't think of his name right now either.
Oh, yeah. That's all. Also, on the
Burroughs.
tip of my tongue. Oh, right. Okay. Are you saying I should? Do you think I should read some Kerouac that I would like him?
I really enjoy Kerouac. My cousin, the first book my cousin suggested me of Kerouac was Dharma Bums. But one of his quotes from I forget what book is, "When I find the right words, they will be simple." I always like that take. Yeah, I think you would enjoy Kerouac.
Cool. Well, I have to mention then because it just popped in my head now. But since you recommended Kerouac, I have to mention the preeminent Chilean poet because he's really awesome, Pablo Neruda. You may have heard of him,
Mm-mm.
but if not, I will send. I can send you a link. I can put a
Please do.
comment on. Yeah, he's honestly. I mean, my nation is small and humble, you could say, but we've had some really pretty titanic figures in literature, and we've had two Nobel laureates. He's one of them, but he's considered even by many now kind of like the Shakespeare of poetry. And he's been translated into many languages. But yeah, his poetry, Ross, is really sort of earthy and kind of spiritual, but also kind of like gritty. And he was very much a man of the people, you could say. So there's like this whole kind of lofty romantic side to his poetry, and also this very sort of, like I said, down to earth, gritty, awesome side to his prose that I think is, yeah,
I'd
you
really
you
like
definitely
that,
check
man.
it out. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Check it out.
No, I definitely will, bro. I mean, I'm always looking for new stuff, and poetry is something that like that was one of the first things that got me into doing like hip hop lyrics or stuff like that was writing poetry, and it's been such a good tool for me to express myself. And then when I read other people's stuff, it just gives me like that next brass ring to strive for, kind of like we were talking about before we started recording about like the one musician you like dialed into and we're like I want to like learn some of his stuff, and you're like it's something I'm always going to be going for or whatever to really develop it. No, I'd love that, man.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I also relate to what you just said because I've never written a whole lot of poetry, but I will. I do kind of off and on keep a journal that I'll just sort of put random entries into, and if I feel like it, I'll write in kind of verse. Like I'll make it a little more sort of I'll have some kind of pentameter or whatever, and make it essentially like kind of free form poetry. But yeah, I get what you're saying as far as the writing lyrics thing that you were telling me about. Writing hip hop lyrics is something that I myself get to see through Brandon, who I think is actually a really great lyricist as well. So I've, I would actually need to check out what you've written. I'd love to. I'd be curious to see what you've got, if there's anything out there, just so I can
Yeah, I have a
check
SoundCloud,
it for
man.
myself. Cool.
I'll send you some of my poetry too. You can check it out sometime if you want. Yeah, but definitely send me that poet, man.
Cool. Yeah, I will send you a link for sure.
Awesome, dude. um And now this is the question that some people have a really hard time with. I think that I would as well. Explain who you are and what you do.
Right. Well, who I am, I can give you the kind of, simple answer. Like I was telling you, before the interview, I'm essentially the producer of the Positive Head Podcast because I edit all episodes and just, help release it to the world. But I'm essentially an artist because I'm a graphic artist, I'm an illustrator, and I'm above everything a musician and a music producer. So I suppose that's who you could say I am. And I was laughing, Ross, earlier. I just saw a clip of Jim Carrey on the Jimmy Kimmel show, and he's of course really hilarious and everything. But he's also someone who's famously explored this whole dimension of life, right? And I will add to what I just said something kind of like what he just said in the interview. That in addition to what I just told you, I'm also life experiencing itself through this guy as opposed to this person who I thought I was that I'm not really sure that I am anymore because it's as time goes on and you expand your mind and all the good things we're doing, you just don't take yourself for granted. I suppose you could say you don't see yourself as who you see yourself as more constantly. At least that's the idea. That's what I would hope that we all do.
Hmm.
That's kind of the path I'm on for sure.
Wow. That, I really like how you end with that, like the way that you ended all that stuff. And I mean, that's been true for me. Like, I normally find out who I was at a time, like when I'm further down the road and like, that's who I was then. Oh, like I couldn't see all of me in that moment. And like, everybody's constantly changing. I've used this analogy before where like, I used to say it in a negative way. And the way that you phrase this makes me want to like perceive it in a positive way. I used to say my bullshit's like an iceberg. I can only see the tip of it, and then there's all this stuff below. And then whenever I uncover something, there's going to get more snow on it. So what I uncover will be covered up, and like I'm never going to know all of it. But that's definitely true for the positive elements of my character as well, where it's always I'm always going to be developing, and I'm never going to be able to know all of who I am.
Yeah, that's actually really awesome how you weave that theme into my answer, man, because that's really insightful. And that's something that I can really understand. But I suppose it's the sort of thing that if you don't get what you just explained, then I'm like, okay, it's fine. Doesn't matter. You'll sort of get it eventually. But what you just said with those words kind of confirms to me that you've taking a glimpse behind the curtain, so to speak, of who we really are, because that was, of course, kind of the gist of your question. But who we are is who we really are is ultimately a mystery. So that's the thing that is kind of mind-boggling is that, yeah, we can know parts of ourselves. We can know ourselves in hindsight. We can know ourselves through our reflections. We can know ourselves through this sort of appearance that we project, but that's not really who we are. So who we are is much like you said, an iceberg that you can never see fully, and it's part of the wonder and the mystery about who we really are. It's just a trip.
You just blew my mind with something that you said on that about like the reflection thing. I had never thought about this before. The only way I ever see myself is a reflection, though. If I look in the mirror, if I look in the camera now from this on my laptop or whatever, I'm seeing a reflection of me. I'm not situated how I actually am. That's like a really, it's so interesting.
Yeah, man, because yeah, exactly. That's like our everyday experience, and then of course, as you may know, or as you have heard, I'm sure through like other people out there, or maybe friends and family that you have had this experience. When someone has an out of body experience, right, and they get to sort of see themselves as if they were a spectator in a movie, right? That whole thing is always such a. Anytime I hear anything like that, I'm like, oh, that's a glimpse into what we were just saying, because people are always like, oh shit, it's so weird to see myself, standing outside of me, right, and watch myself as if I was someone else. That must be a real trip.
I had an experience one time where I had eaten this hash brownie. It had like hash butter and little chunks of hash in it. And I thought I was going to die. So I went and I laid down in my room. And then I woke up and I was standing on the wall staring at myself sleeping. And then like all these Egyptian symbols started flashing. I saw a star form, planet form, life evolve on the planet, life collapse, star burn out. And then a voice said, "You now know the secrets of the mysteries." And then I woke up and I was like, what the hell was that?
Oh, okay. So yeah, you have had a little bit of a taste of what I was talking about. What a trip, though, huh?
Out of the body. Yeah, dude. I've had other experiences, but that was one of the most profound, like out of the body ones where it was just, I mean, people have had way more intense ones. That's just mine. It was just, like you said, mind boggling, dude. I could tear that apart for hours and try to determine what it means, but it means
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah, I've had my own taste of something like that. Wasn't quite like that, Ross, but through my own experiences with ketamine, which is a very interesting psychedelic. And I fancy myself a little bit of a psychonaut, meaning someone who is interested, right, in psychedelics. And I've tried them myself, of course, but I didn't know about ketamine until only a few years ago, and I tried it a few times. And ketamine allowed me to just depersonalize to such a profound degree, Ross, that I remember a few instances in which I was aware that I existed, but the thought of being human was just such a distant memory. I was just like, huh, yeah, I guess I am a human being back on that blue little planet, but that feels like it's a million miles away right now. Like I was just way out there.
Wow.
Just completely not relating to what being a human was, which was actually
Mhm.
kind of awesome. It was like a really pretty liberating experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've never tried ketamine personally. All my psychedelic experiences were like limited to LSD. I did that more than a handful of times, and then shrooms more than multiple handfuls of times. But yeah, I've definitely had really profound, life changing, and awesome experiences on that. Like, although I choose not to use them anymore, they definitely, how do I want to phrase this? They help me like empty the recycling bin of my mind in some ways, and like clear the cache of all the crap that I had built up.
hmm That's awesome because, yeah, it's, I really find like there's a lot of intrinsic value in psychedelic experiences, but it's also, of course, you know, hard to say how it's all gonna, play out for a person because we're all so different, right? The one thing though that I have found, Ross, is it seems like pretty much all people who are interested in trying psychedelic, whether they're, they just find out about acid and end up, trying it that weekend or whatever, or mushrooms or whatever. It seems like for the most part, it's something positive because the person, by virtue of being interested in them, was sort of ready, right? So I find like there's really not, because of course, when people express their concerns about it, it's always thinking of the safety and possible dangerous side effects or anything like that. But it seems like the people who are really not ready for the experience seldom find their way to it somehow.
Mm.
It seems like, when you take them, it's because that's what you were meant to do, it seems. So that's why it seems to me like most of us take away these really kind of profound lessons from them. And of course, people tend to say that, you know, take your pick of acid, mushrooms, MDMA, which is the other thing I've tried that I thought was great, or ketamine, and of course things like ayahuasca and the more sort of intense or strong psychedelics.
Hmm.
They tend to induce these like profound inner realizations, but it's always sort of accompanied by this sense that, yeah, it's something that is something that you will chew on for a long time, something that you shouldn't necessarily be chasing through the drug constantly, because it's more like about yourself, not about the drug, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, it seems like most people take the right kind of lessons from these experiences, at least from what I've seen.
No, I agree. And for me, like, I haven't tripped since 2011, and then after that, I had my experience with mental health stuff or whatever, the psychosis that we were talking about before. And it's like I never wanted to go back to tripping after like having to piece my mind back together from that state. But it is something that it's altered my life, and I'm still, like you said, chewing on some of the experiences I had in psychedelics and piecing that together, and like um, getting different bits of wisdom from those experiences. And Joe Rogan at one point said that that was like a key human experience that people shouldn't miss out on. And I think that that's true. And I also agree with you how people that are ready for them find their way to them. It's kind of like that one thing when the student's ready, the master will appear, that kind of concept.
hmm
Um, but yeah, they have extreme benefit. They can also take people down some roads that they may not want to go down. But somebody once told me that the difficult lessons taught them as much as the pleasant lessons, and that's been true for me too. Have you had that experience also?
Yeah, well, it's funny because what you just said, it's something that really, excuse me, sorry,
You're all good.
just get a little that thought, what you just expressed, popped in my head in the shower earlier today for seemingly no reason, but it was just that same thought that the negative, and I guess it kind of ties back to your first question, but it really is, we're really not here just to experience the sunshine and rainbows and the beauty of life, because that's very worthwhile and very awesome. But we're really here because of the darkness, the pain, the ignorance, all of the negativity of life is a tremendously powerful, valuable side of the experience. So at least that was sort of what, the thought that popped in my head. And of course, you asked a question relating to psychedelics, but to me, that can apply to really kind of life as a whole, because it's really kind of what we're all here to internalize in our own way. But, because all of our life, there's no person whose life is, of course, free of some degree of pain, suffering, right? We're all going to die. So there's that, right? But again, all these things are not intrinsically bad. They're just, you know, the opposite of what we want, right? Of course, we all
Yeah.
want to, feel good and be healthy and all of that. And it's just that, you know, we're all kind of finally beginning, I think, collectively as a species, beginning to grasp what it is that we're doing here and why these things are sort of necessary, really, right? Why there has to be, a completely free kind of playing field where, really freedom really needs to be the ultimate sort of value and goal, right? So that freedom includes the freedom to destroy yourself, destroy your own health, kill each other, and do all the horrible things that we do to each other. But we really have to be able to do them, or we wouldn't know. We wouldn't really know what beauty and love and truth and all of these things are, if there was not the possibility to lose it all, quote unquote.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, man. Yeah, you need that contrast, and you are absolutely correct. That applies to life outside of psychedelic experiences. It's kind of like the stone that sharpens the blade. I did an episode called "Honing the Blade of Humility," and I talked about how like me acting like a fool and getting embarrassed by my actions is like a stone sharpening my blade of humility. And it's like that's what those are. They refine the rough edges of our existence. Pain and misery is what has brought me to today by being like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. How can I better myself to avoid inflicting this pain on myself and on other people through my actions? I think it is a great teacher, man. One of the episodes I want to do is that pain is the tuition to the school of the mysteries.
That's a really great way to put it, man. Because that's sort of like kind of a clever wordplay on what it is that we're doing. But yeah, it's pretty insightful as far as the the nature of the experience. I think you really do get that, all of this, and of course, as you said, it's through your own personal experiences with your sort of journey into yourself, right? And with your psychosis diagnosis, which of course I know, like I was telling you, I think you've made the best out of. But again, it's just something that's kind of tough to deal with because, of course, people cast their judgments, and ultimately that doesn't matter, but it's still something you have to live with, right? So,
No, absolutely. Yeah. That was something that was really hard for me, but it is something I have to live with, people's perception of me. But then it also falls into people's perception of me as a reflection of them, which is not always easy to remember that in the moment. But the thing about saying that too is it applies to me when I view somebody negatively, and I'm like, oh, that's my own inner dialogue viewing them negatively. What's that say about me?
uh-huh. Well, hey, man, I think that you definitely have that. If you have that right understanding of the balance of confidence and humility, and how your ego is a good thing to have, but also it's gonna be it's gonna be softened by the blows of life humbling you through beatings. That's gonna happen. So
Yeah. Have you ever heard the Alan Watts thing where he said losing the ego is the biggest ego trip out there?
No, I hadn't heard that one. See, we were just talking about that earlier. He's really got the best quotes. I should have done that in answer to your question, Ross, on quotes. I may be getting ahead of myself there, but yeah, Alan Watts really has some of the best, huh?
He's one of my favorites. I mean, just as of late, I'm sure that there's other people that have stuff, and he probably pulled his stuff from other things too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I better get back to the next question, or this interview is going to go like it's going to be like a marathon interview.
Yeah, no worries. I'm also making my efforts to help keep, because just kind of like you just hinted at, if I don't watch myself, I'll start meandering. So, I can do a reasonable effort of keeping us on track as well. So
Okay, man, cool. Did you? Wow, that's easy for me to say. Did you feel like you were different than others as a child?
yeah, that's one thing that I did always have from a pretty early age. I have always had something of an awareness that I was different. Uh, One thing that I thought I'd mention to you is just this thing that I would do with my eyes, and kids probably do a lot of these goofy things, and you'd never know it, about them because they'd have to tell you, right? Kids, of course, do all kinds of things that it's the life of a child. But one of the things that I would do is just be looking out the window or looking at whatever and just sort of let my eyes relax in a way where I wasn't focusing on anything in particular. And I would notice that everything started shifting, like everything that I was seeing, my field of vision would just sort of take on this weird kind of vibe to it because my eyes weren't focusing on anything. Anyway, long story short, turns out that I guess years later, I learned that that is actually kind of a technique that some remote viewers or other psychics and people like this, intuitives, use sometimes to where they purposely unfocus their vision, and it helps them. It helps to put them in a different state. But I was doing this spontaneously as a kid, so and when I sort of became aware of this, I'm like, yeah, I'm a little weird probably, but I enjoyed it. So what the hell, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think everybody that I've interviewed on this has said that they felt different as a kid. I always thought that that would kind of be the case. It's interesting to see how that is, though. Are you familiar with the book, The Celestine Prophecy? I think I said that right.
Yeah, Celestine Prophecy was the first book, I think. Well, not the first book, but it was the first book that at a very crucial age in my life got me kind of down the rabbit hole of and I know that that book served that way, it served that same function for like a whole slew of people around my age, around that time, which was the mid to late 90s, I'm going to say, really. But yeah, the Celestine Prophecy was sort of the introductory tone for really for me and for a lot of people I know.
They
Yeah,
talk about that like vision thing in there too, if I'm not mistaken, in one of the parts.
yeah, I think you're right. It's been a long time since I read it, many years, but I think you're right. Yeah.
I think they talk about like being able to see like plant auras or something like that when you kind of relax your vision. I've tried to do it, but I eat meat, and they say that's one of the pre things that'll make it more difficult for you to see the plant auras, which makes sense, I guess.
Huh. Actually, that's one thing that I did kind of take on. I did gain that ability. I can see auras not super strongly, but I can see them. And I think it's really one thing that I think kind of triggered that for me was actually my use of psychedelics in my early 20s, because I feel like that sort of wired something in my brain that maybe gave me that facility. And now I can do it, Ross, but a lot of times it's just sort of like, the way I'm looking at you currently in our video feed, right? You're in front of a background that's a pretty kind of even neutral tone.
hmm
And that's really conducive towards seeing an aura, is if the background is sort of like this muted color that's kind of like, even, consistent, not, anything distracting back there. A lot of times if I'm looking at someone like that and my gaze kind of becomes kind of unfocused and relaxed, I'll naturally kind of see it. It'll startle me sometimes, like I'll just sort of catch myself seeing the halo around them and I'll be like, oh shit, there it is, there's the aura. But yeah, it's not something that I see all the time.
I've seen like colors around people, but I guess I've just kind of discredited what that means. And again, it's not all the time for me either, but it is kind of like when you're tripping and you look at a light and it's dark out and you see that like rainbow of colors. Is that kind of like what you see?
Yeah, it is sort of like a, yeah, kind of like a visual kind of after effect, you could call it, or maybe, something that you would catch under a particular light, or yeah, exactly, if the lighting is kind of, usually kind of low enough, because a lot of times it's, not when it's super bright that you see these things.
That would make sense. That's interesting. I like how it's just so awesome that everybody's kind of always felt different as a kid. Can you think of other instances beyond like the vision thing, or it was just like a general feeling throughout your whole childhood?
Well, let me try and think. I did have perceptions of other people that, just some memories that are actually kind of fragmented, and the fact that they are kind of fragmented memories from my childhood, even now, and at this point in my life, makes me think that, yeah, my perception, just these childhood memories make me think that my perception when I was a child was really just kind of unique. Something that in a sense I almost kind of wish I could regain now, because I was just like, how did I see the world back then? It's like I can't quite relate to how I thought back then. It's like I
Mm.
just think the way I think now. And but when I try and think of how I saw things back then, it's a pretty different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a weird thought that I've had in talking about like trying to readjust your thinking as a child to think like you did as a child. Have you ever thought that where you are now influenced how you thought when you were younger in any capacity?
Oh, were you saying or implying kind of like retroactively?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. It's something that I really do think that that's a thing, if that makes any sense. But it's not something that I think about a lot because there's honestly that's one of the things that starts kind of blowing my mind,
Mm,
and that I don't really know what to make of it because there's I'm probably like you and a lot of people I know that love to actually chew on these different things and kind of um, really pick apart all these different mysterious angles of life and think about this and that and all these you know out there things. But there are certain kind of uh, sides to that whole thing, or aspects, topics, I guess, like this whole fact that time can flow. Of course, we're used to it flowing forward, but it may also flow backwards. And I know I'm aware of that possibility, but I really just don't know what to make of it. Is That's one thing that genuinely feels like really pretty out there to me. Not to
mm,
say that I don't necessarily believe it, but it's just so kind of mind-boggling.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I get it. There's certain things where I'll think about it, I'll toy around with it, but like as far as actually diving into believing it, I can't say one way or another. And I don't want to have it fractal off into a million different ways and kind of carry me with it because I like where I'm at now. So,
Yeah. Well, exactly. I feel like, yeah, I mean, for the most part, I have no problem kind of thinking about any of these things in the interest of, having a conversation or, just for the kind of fun of, if you're that sort of person, I'm going to say it honestly, a little bit like a stoner who will like, just smoke a bowl and be like, oh, look at the, trees, man.
yeah.
Something kind of silly like that. But, there's a lot of truth to that sort of thing, except that I really only will do that so much because one thing that I really do love is to make things practical and relatable to the here and now. So I really
Mm,
don't really engage in too much. Like it's actually fun to do this in a conversation, kind of like we are doing now. But I have known people who are kind of like constantly wanting to go into the abstract and weird, and I'm like, oh, it's only of so much interest to me. I feel like it's interesting, but so is the here and now. The this life. So I try to
yeah,
kind of mesh the two.
I get it completely, man. I mean, I used to be really big into like conspiracies and all this out there stuff, and it doesn't really serve any practical purpose, and it just gives me anxiety and takes away from my ability to properly function in the current moment. So, no, I get it. It's cool to think about and be like a quick little thing, and then just kind of wash our hands from like, okay, now I got to go do the laundry or do the dishes, or now in this case, now I have to ask you the next question.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
just,
okay. That's
yeah, I was just curious. Like, I thought that you would have some insight into it. I like how you say that you can't dive too far into it, really.
well. I feel like it's just kind of balance that you strike with that, as with a lot of things, because for sure there are people who will kind of compulsively avoid any kind of heady or abstract or out there kind of conversation. And I suppose I was just speaking to the other extreme, people who seem to kind of want to do nothing but talk about aliens and, like you were saying, aliens and UFOs and conspiracy theories, but don't want to admit what's going on with them in their own heart, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a avoidance type thing, then escapism.
Yeah, which I have dealt with. I did live with someone who was kind of engaging in that, and that kind of helped, orient me towards, where I really want to be. So
Hmm. Um, this is kind of a fun question. What superpowers do you possess, or what superpowers would you want?
yeah. The superpower that, when I read your question, I honestly thought, invisibility has to be the one that, yeah, that I would want because, um, not only does it appeal to my own kind of personality, as like I was telling you, being a little more shy and sometimes really wishing that I could make myself invisible. I have kind of thought that here and there, but also it would be fun to eavesdrop in certain, you know, go to the White House or somewhere in the EU Parliament and eavesdrop on their conversations and things like that. Superpowers that I may actually have is, I think that really my kind of artistic ability, or my talents with music, painting, and things like that are really my superpower because they are unique to me. And that's one thing that, I've been sort of, I've had some big reminders of that lately, that we all have, if we all do have superpowers, it's the fact that we are so unique, right?
Mm,
It's like our uniqueness is our superpower, you could say. So,
that's
and
awesome.
I feel like in my particular case, it manifests through music, of course, and through art, but we're all different. So
I think that's really a good outlook on personal superpowers, is that we all have them. Sometimes I know for myself, there was things that I had that like I just viewed as so basic and normal about me that I thought everybody had them, that I never perceived them as such. But now, like, I'm like, oh, maybe that is kind of my superpower. Like, I'm good at like reading people or whatever, like somewhat, from being empathic. But I just used to think everybody could do that. And like now I'm starting to realize, no, that that's not the case. And then I'm also like, in psychology, they talk about different things like that. And it's like, I kind of feel that psychic abilities are proven in psychology, but sometimes people, I'm trying to maybe overemphasize what they think they should be as opposed to how they really are practical in the real world, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, I feel like you're kind of getting at the fact that psychic ability is, in a way, and these are my words, but you tell me if I'm onto something. It's like a lot more mundane and everyday of a thing than a lot of us think. That we just do it all the time, really, in a sense.
no, I think that was exactly what I was trying to articulate. I think, and I understand that I don't understand every psychic power, but I think that it is kind of more simplistic and mundane, as you said, than like magic. Magic happens all the time. Have you ever heard the analogy of like making the sandwich or whatever? How that's a form of magic, where it's like, I want the sandwich, I'm going to make it. Now
Yeah.
I eat the sandwich. Yeah. And it's like, I think that is true to an extent. Not to say that higher things don't exist from that level, but I think that people consciously
Yeah.
participate in that stuff more so than they're aware of, I guess.
Yeah, that's one in magic. The fact that you brought up that word, actually, magic, I like that you did that, because that's one thing that I share with Brandon, and that's one thing that I know he's really big into, of course, of course, I'm talking about Brandon Beecham of the Positive Head Podcast, right? But
Mm-hmm.
he's like a child when it comes to that, and it's so endearing, right? He gets so giddy about magic, but that's one thing that, he's just in touch with that very childlike sense of wonder about magic. And the thing is that that's helped keep that sort of mindset and vibe present in my life, I feel like. And the fact that you just brought up the term now, and also the idea that, yeah, magic is something that is present in our everyday lives in ways that are, kind of startling to really realize sometimes. And it's something that I think is really awesome. But the one thing I did want to say is that I think it's mundane, but that doesn't necessarily mean, kind of like disposable. Just because something is mundane, or maybe that's not the right word, but something can be both mundane and extraordinary at the same time, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Because you could think of, a grain of sand as being that, right? Like, like you were saying, eating a sandwich or making a sandwich is magical. Well, it's both very mundane and ordinary, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also magical in its essence. So I think that's what it is that there's so much that appears completely ordinary and it's anything but. And appearances, that's one big thing with me. Appearances are very deceiving. Appearances are only a very small part of any story. So, a lot of everyday magic is disguised as just completely ordinary things, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, we're just like so used to it. Like a fish doesn't see water, just as like we don't think about air because we're always in that element. So we're just very acclimated to magic. And when you were explaining how it's mundane but extraordinary, I thought that was really profound. And it has like this duality that's inherent in it. And I'm very big about like breaking out of duality in lots of ways. So it's like, we look at it at the mundane part of making the sandwich, or the grain of sand or whatever. But then when you think about what the grain of sand is in relation to things, it's very extraordinary. But then when you pull out even further and think of the fact that we're on this little pebble floating through space or whatever it is, and there's this sandwich or this grain of sand that we did whatever with, that's like the extra extraordinary, And it's like, it reunites it into that extraordinary. It's just mundane because we kind of take it for granted, but it's mundane and not. Like, I think that that's so awesome.
Yeah. Now I did definitely get thinking, Ross, about Carlos Castaneda, because you may have heard of him. And, you mentioned your interest in shamanism. To me, that's sort of the intersection of all these things, right? Shamanism, magic, which of course I guess is a part of that. But I think that in one of his books, it may have been even the Don Juan book, but I think he echoes something like this, and he does talk about the sort of everyday magic that you have to put yourself in a certain frame of mind to perceive. It's something that you have to sort of be looking for, and also learn to recognize through the appearance of something ordinary. See past the facade of something that appears one way, and see the magical thing underneath it or behind it. But yeah, I think that or Carlos and Don Juan may have echoed something like this. If not, it's always a good time to go back and check out those books.
Yeah, actually, I just ordered that book 2 weeks ago. I just got it in the mail, and you're the second guest in 2 weeks that's mentioned Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan. I got The Yaqui Way of Knowledge, so I'm so looking forward to diving back into that and reading it again. It was such a good time before. My life experiences now, from then till now, may have prepared me to get different things from the book this time as well.
Yeah. If you're thinking along those lines, Ross, what you just said will probably be the case, because that happens. That's like the perfect sort of precursor to that experience. It's like, if you think, I have changed, so I'm expecting that things are going to look a little different to me now. Yeah, that's almost guaranteed to be the case, I would say.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really enjoyed about reading some of the books I've always loved, is when I read them a year later, 5 years later, or whatever, there's still the parts that I like stand out, but sometimes those same sentences can have completely different meanings, and it's the same story, but it's completely different to how it applies to my life.
Yeah, I have had that experience myself, man, and it's something that it was a little surprising to me the first time it happened. But yeah, it was quite a few years ago that, I remember having that exact same experience, reading a book that I thought was good, and then reading it again sometime later, something like a year, 2 years later, and upgrading it from a good book to just stone cold classic, just going like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see this or get this the first time.
Yeah, it's so interesting how different life experiences like prepare you to learn different lessons, and then like all those experiences culminate into like something completely different. I mean, even like understanding different forms of symbolism or esotericism or like hermeticism, things like that. When I read books now, I'm like, holy crap, this is what this is actually referencing. Or I put that filter on it and it gives it a different profound thing. I don't know. It's so intriguing to me how the mind works and how these classic tales have multiple different ways to be interpreted. Have you ever read any? What's that?
No, I was just, I'll tell you in a second, but what were you going to ask me?
No, you can go first. It's all good.
Well, what I was going to tell you is that it just occurred to me that may be really your superpower, because, from everything that I've gotten talking to you now, I get that, like, you definitely seem intellectually curious to read all these different books and, things like, and understand, really the nuts and bolts of the mystery, I guess, take that peek behind the curtain. But you're also really, I get that you're naturally good at synthesizing that information and making it just something that, you can share with your podcast audience. You can explain it in a very sort of succinct way, in a very, it's really not that easy. I come to realize, to kind of distill this knowledge in a way that you can share with people and have it be useful to others. You know what I mean? I have known a lot of people who are really, I guess, a lot smarter than me, but I felt like they were kind of trapped in this, kind of like I was saying earlier, this dimension of very abstract, kind of out there thinking. And you do a great job of kind of, connecting all the dots, really.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. That's one of the things that's been important for me in my podcast, is like trying to tie these things together. Like one of the episodes I did was about real life, the reality of monsters or something like that. And I went through vampires and talked about emotional vampires. And I went through zombies and talked about, like, I mean, the zombie one is, I think, more evident to people, but just how there's all these brain dead people, and like how one of the ways that the zombies survive is like eating brains. And I'm like, if you look at some of the ways that brain dead people are, they try to eat your quote unquote brain by the way they share information or things. I don't know. It was just, or werewolves, like how these people change from one thing to another. Like I've been that way emotionally, where emotionally I can be one way and then the next I'm a werewolf, quote unquote. But like, no, I appreciate that compliment, man. That makes me feel good that I'm able to navigate that. I never even really thought of that, I guess. So,
Well, what I think is really awesome though is that that's something that I've just sort of perceived now. But I would say even if, of course, that's just my opinion, but even if that wasn't the case, you should still just do your thing for the other reasons that we were talking about before, just to put yourself out there. I recognize the value in that and sort of deciding that you have something to say, even though you wouldn't have thought that you did 2-3 years ago.
mm,
That whole idea that you can actually contribute something, even if it's just talking about things that interest you, that are of interest to you, right? Because yeah, your point of view can actually be beneficial to someone else. But like I was saying, that's sort of the cherry on top of the cake. Because even if it was just for you, if you were just doing it just to sort of process your own stuff in your life, then that would be good enough, I would think.
no, absolutely. That's the thing. Like, I had an issue, I don't know, a month ago or a couple weeks ago, where like I was like, this isn't growing how I would like it to. Like, I should be reaching more people. And then I realized I'm reaching exactly how many people I should be from where I'm at this stage. And it's not so much about how many people I reach, it's about how many people get something from what I'm doing and how I get something from what I'm doing. It's not about the numbers of anything, really. I mean, I could have a bunch more listeners and be less successful in what my thing is, which is trying to help people think differently about stuff and come up with their own ways of thinking about things. I don't know. Like, it's such an interesting experience to go through all of it, though.
Yeah, yes, it is, because now I have a little bit of a window into the world that you have decided to join, which is this crazy world of podcasting, and you know, especially podcasts like these where we get into the juicy topics that we of course are fascinated by, that some people might roll their eyes at, but um no, I think it's awesome because it's something that I really can't take for granted. There really needs to be more of it out there. And yeah, I think that in a way we're kind of helping. One of the things that I know we're doing is helping make other people more comfortable with these ideas, because for a lot of people that haven't necessarily had the I guess support from their circle of peers, people who find themselves in places where just speaking out on any of these things will get them almost into trouble, you could say, right? I know, because I've seen the comments on the Positive Head page, that some people are really kind of vicariously, you could say, living through us, or at least getting to explore these topics through our conversations, like the ones that Brandon has and that I have and you and I are having now.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that's kind of crazy, is that it isn't just for our own amusement and benefit, but it actually might help someone even work through their issues, crazy as that may seem. Because yeah, I only have a very abstract understanding of that, but I also see the comments that people make, and that's the takeaway. So.
No, I mean, I know from my personal experience, you're in Brandon's conversations, because I started listening a couple weeks before you ended up um, going back home or whatever, and you guys really helped me at a very difficult time in my life, and really helped me. It changed my life in lots of ways. I don't listen to it nearly as much as I'd like to now, but you guys have greatly impacted where I'm at today. More so than I think Brandon will ever know, or that you could ever know. Even Nixie Marie helped me a lot as well. And it's like, I've had people tell me similar things, and I'm like, I'm just me doing my thing. Like, I like to talk about this 3-second exchange I had when I lived in Humboldt. I was like really depressed and hungover, and I was walking through the community forest in Arcata, and I was just down, and there was this dude sitting on this stump, and he said, "Smile, dude, you're in California." And I was like, oh yeah, I am. And I just like smiled, and like it changed my whole reality. That happened. That was 3 seconds, probably 7, 8 years ago. And I still talk about it today. So it's like people never realize how much people can impact them, especially when it's just like a quick little exchange like that. And talking about stuff like this is crucial, man. I live in Youngstown, Ohio. Not the bastion for like free thinking, like expansive topics like this.
Right.
So I get to talk about this stuff, and I get to interact with people that are on the same wavelength, and it makes me feel comfortable. And I don't know, man, it's just a cool experience, and knowing that it can help other people, like it's so surreal.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great point you just made about it being also something that, you know, doesn't need to be lengthy. Of course, just a 3-5 second, interaction can be enough, right? But it's just kind of weird because you just made a good point, but at the same time, I kind of see that, yeah, maybe in Ohio, I kind of have an idea of what you mean about, people, a certain kind of mindset in your locality, right, where you live. Some people, of course, will be receptive, but a lot of people will laugh or roll their eyes or just ignore it, right? And I know that the numbers of people, like-minded people, generally like-minded like us, are growing, but I know that we're really still, the minority in just about anywhere you go. I mean, even in Southern California, where it seems like there's a lot more, of like-minded people like ourselves, and there are, but that could only really be in part a function of there being so many people there. It's like if you could have, I guess I'm trying to say, if you crunch the numbers, you would see that the percentage is still kind of small. So
That makes sense. I think also too that part of the reason that people are so dispersed in that kind of sense is because it's easier for that kind of mindset to get spread out. Because if it was all centralized, then it wouldn't be evenly dispersed, I guess. Not that it's necessarily even, but you know what I mean? Like you don't plant all your seeds in one seed hole in a garden and expect to have the whole garden fill up, I guess.
right. Yeah. In fact, the way you just explained it, the opposite might be really what you would, typically find more, which is, I guess, what the thing that you would expect to find. Obviously, you think, there's been, socioeconomic studies done on what the different cultural mindsets, whatever, right? But of course, if you go to Ohio, you have certain conditions that all come together to make the people think a certain way. And then same here for this part of Chile where I lived, and same for Southern California. Um, but yeah, you can, I guess, predict a lot more how people will think than you can predict these kind of outliers of people who are, outside the norm in their mindset, and maybe sometimes way outside the norm.
Mm-hmm. I had a really interesting experience, and I'll get back to the questions. I'm sorry for keeping going off on these tangents. When I was in California and I was in psychosis, I was getting ready to move back home, and I was really terrified about it. And I had this vision of part of the reason I had to come back home was to share some of what I gained and kind of spread the love. And I thought about how this area is the heartland. And this might not make sense to some people, but like it was very scary for me. And I thought I was going to have all these difficulties coming back here. Sure enough, I moved back here. And if I looked at what I'm doing now, I'm back in the heartland, and I'm sharing a lot of what I've learned from my travels, from different experiences. And I kind of am bringing my vibe to the area that I'm in. I've helped with like art events or things like that for people with mental health, because I paint and stuff like that. But like, I really ended up doing kind of like what I thought I would do in psychosis. It's not to the extreme thing where like I'm not the messiah in Ohio, but it's interesting how that played out, I guess.
I feel like I understood what you said, even though, of course, you just gave kind of like a succinct explanation of what that whole thing is. But I relate a lot to that because I may have engaged in the same kind of process by coming back home, right? Because I came from the US to Chile. So, and, even though my country is very far south, very far away from everything, it does represent me coming back to my heartland in a sense, right? So it does represent that same sort of journey to a place that is very much home in a sense. And I think that I am also kind of doing what you said, because I did bring all the things that I am and my mindset that I've, developed over all these years. But I find that, yeah, it's something that I have to I have to believe it's worthy of being shared, because not so much because I'm right and everyone should think like me, right? But because if I have learned anything of value, then the only thing to do now is to share it, right? I feel like that's the next logical thing to do, right? So
Yeah, you can only keep what you have by giving it away in terms of wisdom. So
yeah, and actually, something like that isn't a value unless you share it, I suppose, because if you don't, then it just sits there and it doesn't do anything. So
yeah, and if you're not using it, you lose it too. So it's like, plus there's always going to be people that'll resonate with you. And you don't seem like the type of person that's going to try to make a Dalien clone. You're going to try to teach somebody to be who they are, which is what more people need, I think, because everybody wants to be somebody else.
yes, yeah, and actually, if there is one kind of takeaway out of any kind of conversation like this that you may have with anyone, or people may have with their friends and relatives, I suppose that really should be it, because the way you just said it kind of drove the point home for me that so many of us now, especially now, I'll say, because given the kind of relevant global climate, right, with the U.S., in the current administration, which I'm only going to reference like that, right, but of course that has a lot of people kind of concerned, right, and people are just generally concerned about the state of affairs in the world, regardless, right, because of things that have carried on for decades. But if there's one thing that we could really give each other as a huge gift, is the ability to think in a new way, even not necessarily tell each other what to think, but how to think differently, really is
Mhm.
it's the thing that's needed more.
I agree completely, man. Like one of the leads into my podcast is I don't want to tell you what to think, but to get you to think and originally articulate yourself in a way that is uplifting. It's like,
Exactly. Yeah, because you may have heard about this too, Ross, but Brandon got a negative review that he read on the podcast, and I was actually kind of chuckling when I heard it, because the person was so kind of they gave him 1 star and gave him a really pretty scathing review, that where they were kind of clearly projecting something. It's really the only kind of conclusion you can draw from that, kind of accusing him and myself of brainwashing people. But it's just hard to brainwash people when we all think the way that we do because of our own idiosyncratic reasons, right? I couldn't brainwash another human being even if I tried, because they're only going to believe what they're already sort of inclined to.
so you were talking about the review and how it was like the person projecting.
Yeah, but I guess that's what I was trying to share, is that this person was accusing us of brainwashing others, and nothing could be really further from his intent. I know Brandon's intention, of course, is not to brainwash, but exactly do what you were just saying, just to share, things that he finds interesting with other people, but just to get people thinking, right?
Mhm.
Is the idea, just to get people thinking critically always, and with of course plenty of healthy skepticism, but definitely an open mind. That's those are things that for a lot of people it's actually pretty tricky really learning how to do, right? I mean, some of us kind of find them more naturally easy to be kind of fair-minded, right? But for some of us have been indoctrinated our whole lives, right, by our culture, religion, right, politics, and it can be difficult to break away from that. So I try not to take that sort of thing for granted either.
No, absolutely. I mean, so many people talk about indoctrination starting at like education level or whatever, but it really starts as soon as you're born because they give you a name, a religion, like all this stuff. And your parents have the best intentions, absolutely, but they've already been indoctrinated by culture, and then they're pushing these cultural ideologies on you from womb to grave, basically, until you kind of wake up to it. Yeah, I didn't hear the negative review that this person had shared. I haven't been listening to the podcast as much because I'm so busy, but I
Well,
need to listen
yeah.
to it more.
No, it's like you were saying, there's just so much content, being put out too. And like we were just sort of chuckling there for a second. Brandon's honestly a bit crazy to be putting out 5 episodes a week, but it's actually really awesome because we can do it. but at the same time, we realize that it's kind of a lot. I mean, it really is kind of a lot even for us, and we're the ones producing the content. But no, yeah, that's exactly it. That's I thought it was cool that of course, he shared a negative review to just to switch it up, but also
Absolutely.
it was just so kind of clearly projection, I suppose you could say, and especially that sort of projection of us kind of brainwashing people when, again, like I said, it's not only the opposite of our intention, but it's kind of hard. It was just kind of hard for me to see how someone could think that, but again,
Yeah, I've heard the phrase, if you think you're corrupted, you already are. If you think you can be corrupted, you already are. And
right.
I don't think brainwashing is as prevalent as some people would like to think that it is.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, actually, I guess that's a good point too, because you, in a way, kind of said, hey, it's fine to rail against, this kind of brainwashing, but what about this other kind of brainwashing that we're subjected to every day, right? The kind of brainwashing that a lot of us don't see. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to avoid. I mean, one of the things when I was psychotic is I thought that people did try to brainwash me because I had watched so much conspiracy crap. And
Mhm.
have you ever studied etymology at all of different words? Like,
I'm generally interested in it a little bit. Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, entertainment means to contain within, and I was like into conspiratainment in lots of ways. So I'm containing all this crap in myself, and then like I talked about psychedelics being like a psychic purge, and I really think that psychosis was like that for me too, where it like made all this stuff kind of very real for me. But it was like my brain clearing that stuff out, and I've come to the realization now that I don't need to feed into a lot of that stuff because I'll start believing it. So
Yes. Yes. That's well said. Exactly.
people brainwash themselves.
Yeah, and I do definitely try to be careful with what I give my attention to these days. I definitely try to. I mean, that's one thing that I kind of wish my mom, for example, wouldn't do so much. It's like, since coming back home to live with her, plenty of times I'll go into her room and see her watching TV and watching the news and kind of yelling at the television even a couple times, and I'm thinking, just turn it off. Don't give so much of your attention to that, because
Hmm.
what are they doing but presenting a certain point of view that is crafted to in a sense it's designed to push your buttons, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, they want to give you talking points and get an emotional reaction. And people talk about not following the mainstream media, but then they think that they can follow alternative media or whatever. But alternative media is just as potentially misleading as me. It's like, shut off the TV and go outside and look at what's going on in the world. Like, not to
right.
say that you have to be aware, but it kind of is like you talked about like squinting your eyes when you were younger. You have to kind of just see the vague outlines of what's there and not dive into the finer details of people selling you a certain opinion, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that we're kind of on the same page there, because my mom and of course a lot of other people will say, in response to the whole specifically comments about the news or watching the news, they'll be like, well, I need to be informed. And my response is usually something like, well, what is that information that you're seeking out? Is it quality information, or are you just taking on whatever they give you, kind of thing, right?
Hmm. And it is. It's just talking points and projecting whatever side of the thing. Journalism's really largely dead.
Yeah, sadly, I'll have to agree, but I there may be some hope still.
No, I think that that's a fair point. I think that that's a lot healthier position because there are still real journalists out there that are presenting real information. Um, I better try to get back to the questions, or we'll be here all day. Which I actually wouldn't mind, but I'm sure you have stuff to do.
Right? Yeah. No. Let's do it, because yeah, we can happily continue on this very kind of eclectic conversation, but we have to try and contain it if we can, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. What circumstances do you feel shaped your life?
I would have to say, Ross, that moving to the US, of course, was a very formative experience for me. For me, the thing that made it so critically impactful was moving there when I was 19, man, and also having the sort of big opening of, I guess you could call it, the spiritual breakthrough, right? Moving to a whole nother country like the US from South America at that age, and also at the same time beginning to try psychedelics and think about, spiritual subjects, reading certain books, talking to certain people. Those two things came together for me in a way where it was just, uh, um, like an atomic bomb beyond what I could have realized. Because, of course, just a cultural shock, you could say, right? Just that huge change would have been enough of, and I'm sure it was, but kind of compounding that was the fact that I was having my kind of spiritual awakening, you could say. And it's something that just kind of begun because it's not anything that just happened and now I'm awake, right? It's not like an experience that is over with. It's an ongoing process. But yeah, those two things, moving to America and, um, you know, doing my first tab of acid and, all of that just kind of, you know, expanded my horizons beyond what I could have hoped. So.
I could definitely see that. I know travel for me has been. I think it was Terrence McKenna that said travel is like a psychedelic experience. So traveling and doing psychedelics like yourself, those are definitely things that have shaped my life for the better. Ultimately, I traveled around a lot. Although I didn't have like that culture shock. Still, every state I've lived in has been completely different in the way that things are set up. It's not as an extreme culture shock, but no, those are definitely. I can see how that would do that. What positive lessons did you learn from your negative experiences?
I guess it would be something kind of like what I said earlier regarding negativity in general, because I have come to realize that my own darkness, my own personal darkness, is also my power. So, it's not something that, again, I'm not fully done with that because it's something that I continue to, process and understand and explore, every day. But it's this awareness. And I guess the thing is that that's a realization that just really kind of came together for me, Ross, only a few years ago. So, maybe 20 years ago, you could have explained that to me in some sort of abstract sense and I would have understood what you meant. But of course, to just understand the words that someone's explaining to you or saying, an idea that someone tells you and to actually live it, in a very profound way, especially if you're talking about, all these kind of deep, heady, potentially, dense and dramatic things like dealing with in your case mental illness, in my case something very much like that, depression, right? Which, like I was telling you, is a bit of a family condition. um you come to, that's the point that I hope everyone would get to, but I feel like I got to that point eventually. At some point I got to the point where I knew that my my pain and my sort of joy in life were completely interrelated. That one was the other coin side of the coin of the other. That there weren't two separate coins, but that were one and the same.
Mm.
And so I continue to just kind of try and deepen my understanding of that every day to really kind of dive into my own negativity and darkness and transmute it into whatever I can, right? So
No, that's real alchemy there. No, I get it, man. Facing my shadow has been one of the most beneficial things. It's a little messy at times, and
yeah.
I get some shit on myself, but it's definitely one of the best things that I've done. I think it was Joseph Campbell who said that basically that's where the light is in the heart of your darkness.
Absolutely. And when, that reminded me of the Tool lyrics, because I'm into all kinds of different music. We've talked about a little bit about music, but um, I've liked the band Tool for a long time, right? And even really beyond the music, which honestly, Tool's music now, it's like, I kind of like it still, but, you know, musically, I'm not that excited by them anymore. But I've always had huge respect, of course, for Maynard James Keenan's lyrics, right? Especially this sort of brave way in which he's chosen to kind of explore some of these themes, because he's in some of his lyrics he'll talk about deep insecurity, some of his darkness that he's chosen to kind of reveal in his lyrics, traumatic experiences that he's gone through. But there's a guy who in the context of a really heavy rock band, of course, we'll talk about, emotional catharsis and kind of doing shadow work. Actually, he talks about the shadow self, right, in one of his songs. And 18, 20 years ago, hearing that in the context of a rock band helped me kind of process a lot of this shit myself, right? And shadow work, of course, is just to use those words. Shadow work is probably what we're all here to do. I think not something you have to do because it is scary and painful, but that is a great opportunity that we're here to sort of take advantage of.
Mm-hmm. No, I like how you mentioned Tool. I like Tool. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
No, and I said, and of course, I mean, all of us here, human beings on planet Earth, that's what we're trying to do. But yeah, that's one thing about Tool that I've always had sort of, it's the reason why, even though, like I said, their music doesn't quite do it for me anymore, but yeah, I've always loved that band for that reason.
Yeah, I don't listen to them anymore either, but I was in one group and somebody was talking about how good they are at kind of awakening people through music and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that that's very true. Looking at their songs now, because I didn't catch on to that back in the day. What philosophy, spirituality, or religions do you find most aligned with your understanding? And please explain them as they apply to you.
These would have to be what most apply to me because of my kind of personal history. Because when I moved to the U.S., when I had only been there for a couple of years, someone invited me, Ross, to a Taoist ceremony. And it was actually what turned out to be my third eye opening ceremony. They explained to me what that whole, entailed, what that whole process entailed at the time. But again, it was just sort of scratching the surface of what the experiences actually turned out to be. It's like an ongoing thing that I can't really even hardly put into words sometimes. But essentially, my introduction to Taoism led me to kind of propel me further down my spiritual path. And so, for that reason, I guess that Taoism and the very, I guess you could say, closely related philosophy or religion of Buddhism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those two, Taoism is older, of course, and they share a lot of kind of history and even some myths and traditions, right? But I would have to say that Taoism and Buddhism align most closely with who I am for a number of reasons, but especially because I was sort of initiated into Taoism. And like I said, it just, kind of had a profound effect in my life that I kind of even partially understand, to be honest. Now it's like they explained that they were opening my third eye, and of course that sounds like sounds intriguing. But what does that really even mean? I'm still kind of piecing that answer together. So yeah.
I definitely relate to Taoism. I've only recently, within the past year, investigated Taoism. And it's something that's really helped me profoundly on my journey, because then I can see everything as a process and not individual parts, or it helps me transcend the duality of things, because it's all just the mystery or the way or whatever you want to call it. And Buddhism too has been something that really helps me because of the detachment element of that. And I haven't really studied either of them in depth. I've only really scratched the surface of those philosophies or whatever they really are. But the benefit from even just that has been fundamentally life-changing, like beyond words.
Yeah, that's how awesome they are. And I have to kind of, like you just did, clarify that, yeah, I really don't, aside from being initiated in a very kind of, again, it's kind of superficial way, I have not, delved deeply. I didn't become a Buddhist per se, right? And I really have only read a couple of books, and like you, my interest is sort of superficial and casual. Not meaning a bad thing, of course, but yeah, it's just what aligns with me naturally. I guess the other side of that coin, and of course, I could ask you as well. I imagine you were raised in some sort of Protestant denomination. Here in Latin America, Catholicism is really the main strand of Christianity, right? That most people are likely to sort of be raised in. So my parents were never very religious people, so we were very casual Catholics, very, much wants to go to church on, Easter and Christmas twice a year.
Mm.
So But of course, because for a lot of us in the Western world, it's some form of Christianity that leads us to the kind of Eastern philosophies, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really have any religion in my life really growing up. After my parents divorced, my dad took me to a church down the road from us a couple times, and I was like, "No, I'd rather stay at home and play Nintendo." 'Cause that was
He
the
was like,
thing.
"Oh, okay, sure, sounds good."
Yeah.
Press the issue.
And then
Nice.
my stepmother was Serbian Orthodox, and I checked out their religion a couple times, but I've always been like an overthinker in lots of ways, and I couldn't understand a lot of concepts of religion because it didn't make sense to me. And then with the way that certain religions acted historically, or the way that people within those religions reacted, I was like, well, crap, I don't want, I don't want to follow this path.
Yeah. I can't in good conscience endorse your faith, sir. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, being any kind of a thinking human being, exactly. You can't help but come to that conclusion, right? Especially if you're looking at some form of Christianity. I guess it would be hard to find that same kind of fault in Buddhism because they go out of their way to be non-violent and, non
Mhm.
anything aggressive, I guess. But yeah, I hear you, man. I mean, as a Catholic, it seems especially easy to see through the folly and foibles of the church, the Catholic Church, of course. But yeah, Christianity in general is kind of it's not something that will hold if you become much of a critical thinker, really. So
Mhm.
not to say
Yeah.
that there aren't some truths to the faith, of course.
No, I mean, I definitely think there's true in a lot of the major religions. I think that they all kind of talk about similar concepts in different words and different metaphors, different allegories, or whatever. Um, and one of the things that I really had to struggle with was realizing, like, overcoming my own religious prejudice towards certain religions, especially like Christianity or Catholicism, and not labeling everybody that follows them as like bad or this or that. And it was like, that was hard for me to do after like the way that I perceive things, because there genuinely are good people in there and there's misled people. They're just people, I guess. But like,
Hmm.
that was so hard for me to do, is to peel away that label that I put on myself and how I defined that. But I still fall into it sometimes, but I do my best to just be like, other people, they got good intentions. Some of them don't, whatever.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to religion, I really can't fault anyone for getting a little. I mean, Bill Maher, the comedian, right, and talk show guy. Of course, he came out with a movie Religulous a few
Hmm.
years ago. Where did you ever see it?
Hmm.
Yeah, I saw it one time, I think too. So, if you're inclined to think like him, you will find that very entertaining and kind of along the lines of the way you think too. But I try to do what you just said exactly. I try to not get too hardcore on people because I do see that as sort of their prerogative. Even though it can be hard to be like, how can you believe that stupid shit sometimes when that's all you want to say
Yeah.
to someone, right? But hey, it's like you. I try to sort of be mindful that it's people, not
Hmm.
sheep, actually, even though they may behave like sheep sometimes. But yeah,
Yeah, if that's what they need to get through their day, I guess more power to them. I mean, if they start hurting people, I feel that there's punishment in the action of acting that way in itself. So me
yeah,
judging them and being a prick to them isn't going to resolve it. It's just going to soil my own self. So
yep, well said, exactly.
thank you. What do you perceive as your life's purpose?
Ooh, my life's purpose. It would really, the only way that I know how to answer now that question would be to just put out my art and or things that I have to share with the world, right? Like conversations like these, because I don't think that there's really any other grander purpose for me other than um, what how important it is for me to live my life because I'm the little miniature god of my own universe. Like you are the creator of your own universe, so your journey is all important to you. But I mean, I don't mean anything negative by this, but it really doesn't. It's not important to anyone else, right?
I
So
get it.
that's the thing about being a human being that's such a trip is that there are definitely a lot of things in our lives that are only really relevant to ourselves and that will never even, I guess, be known by others. But that's only one dimension. And then on the other dimension of the reality we get to live in, we get to share, right? so much of our experience in ourselves. And so I guess that's that purpose. The way I understand it now is just to share my music, my drawings and paintings, and my thoughts. So.
I think I'm right on that path with you, man. So I completely get it. And I think that although people might not recognize it, the energetic force of the universe is like, yeah, go, like, go you. I get it, and I think that kind of ripple effect in the universe, I think that if you like leave an imprint on that, and it gives you a trophy or whatever, a universal etheric trophy for finding yourself and pursuing what you want to do in a healthy way to help people.
Yeah, well said. I think that is like tapping into your power. So I guess if power and purpose go together in any kind of a fashion, then that's how I would put them together, the way you just explained.
Well, yeah, I think that really is the way to do it. For me too, I found that realizing I'm powerless is the ultimate power, really, in lots of ways. And like by kind of realizing I'm just one little drop in a bucket, and I'm still gonna make my art. I'm still gonna do my podcast. I'm still gonna do this, and it doesn't really matter. Like I talked about feeling I wasn't successful enough or whatever. None of it matters then, because I'm just doing what I do. Mm-hmm. I'm being a raw Cessna in this moment.
Exactly. But there's that holistic way of thinking that you have again, though, man, because that's a more expanded, honestly, that's the way I see it now, is a more expanded way of looking at things. I would have been happy to just sort of talk to you or answer that question from sort of one angle, but you immediately kind of take that and see the whole other complementary side of that, and talk about how, yeah, of course, as human beings we are powerful, and if you look at any kind of spirituality or spiritual teaching, it'll kind of try and show you what the ultimate human power is, which is actually quite large creative power that we have, right? But the other side of that coin is that we are tiny, and we are these momentary specks in this huge universe, right? So that power, we know that our human power is limited, but it's also limitless. So it's that paradox of how is it? Yeah, exactly. I think I know what you're saying, but I just thought I'd point that out. That if any of your listeners want further sort of insights from you on this, that's plenty of reason for you to keep doing your podcast, because you can give them a different angle of this thing, like every time. And it's not something that a lot of people necessarily know or see, at first brush, anyways.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I just say what comes out, and I hope it makes sense to other people.
Yeah, well, that was my attempt at making sense of it. But again,
I think you did. Yeah. No, I got what you meant.
Oh, okay. Well, cool. Then that would have been my success in taking what you said and trying to really, distill that more holistic way of, that I think is really awesome. And it's something that I really try and do myself, is to always, I suppose, always see the other side of, always know that there's more to any story, and always be sort of ready to see that more, right? To find it and look for it, etc. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to follow the evidence where it leads, not just stop at the fluffy, nice bits, but also not just stop at the crap.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
I guess what do you need to do to feel that you were working towards that goal? I guess you kind of answered it by saying what you're doing, but I'll give you the option to answer that if you want.
Yeah, that would be the answer to that, is to just to share it. Although I guess I will circle through that again real quick, though, because we were talking about that before, and we both were kind of echoing each other's sort of perspective. And that's the reason why I want to say this, is that I know a lot of people feel this way. A lot of people who aren't Brandon Beecham of the Positive Head Podcast will be a little more insecure about sharing their thoughts and feelings, and will feel trepidation at putting themselves out there. And I would think that they never do. And in my mind, it seems like there's almost no good reason to hold back when it comes to something like this. When it comes to sharing what you think is important, or what you're really passionate about. So yeah, just to push myself to go outside of my comfort zone and put myself out there and do it, even though I might be scared shitless. Which I'm not completely scared shitless, but a part of me is, right? So it's just pushing in spite of those reservations.
No, I get that, man. If you had to describe your personal philosophy or condense your life experiences into a few words, what would it be?
Ooh, okay. Condense my life experience or philosophy. I guess that's where I'm at right now. So I would circle once again back around to the fact that everything dark or negative in life is the light in a different form. So everything is light ultimately, but we wouldn't know that unless some things were not light. How is that even possible if everything's light? That's a great mystery, right? But I think that is where I'm at right now, is trying to marry and blend and integrate those two, the darkness and light, anything painful with anything joyful, transmute the crap into gold, all of that good
Yeah,
stuff.
divine union and alchemical process and all of those things. No, that's awesome, man. I've always liked to look at, I shouldn't say always, recently, within the past year, I've come to the conclusion that I like to look at light as like the light and dark as a dimmer switch where they're all unified on the switch. And that makes so much more sense to me than like thinking of them as opposites. But I understand some people can't see it that way yet, but they'll get there when they're supposed to.
Exactly. That is much more like the way things really are, though. What you just said, things are a spectrum, a continuum of really degrees of whatever temperature, from hot to cold. It's not, hot and cold are the extremes of this scale of temperature, and so it's the same with everything else. And consciousness is very much like that. I think it's all degrees of consciousness, not discrete places that you're at. Although that it may make sense to talk in terms of discrete steps that you reach, I guess, just to help your understanding. But you can never separate anything from anything else. That's one thing that, of course, reductionist science, that's a corner that they kind of painted themselves into, is by always taking apart everything and putting it under a microscope, they start to realize that they weren't actually learning about life. They were learning about disassembled, taken apart life, and that's not the same thing. So.
No, totally. It's kind of like we're a part of the universe, even though we see ourselves as individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
Who inspires you?
Who inspires me? At this time, I would say that I don't have necessarily one sort of key figure in popular culture that I can say inspires me. I'm really much more inspired by everyday people and by the things they do that are inspiring, I suppose you could say. Because, like, for example, I'm definitely inspired by people like Brandon and people like yourself doing, again, kind of circling back around to this, but making that effort to put themselves out there and actually going through the trouble of doing, because it's not something that's completely, you can't just roll out of bed and a podcast will be ready, for you to release, right? You actually have to make the effort to do it all. So, but yeah, that's what really inspires me now more than anything, because there isn't, I don't have, one huge sort of popular figure that I'm really thinking about a lot. And on the other hand, my interactions with people every day kind of reveal to me those awesome little things that we all do, including myself, but I see them in other people, of course. So that's what I gravitate towards.
I think that's really well worded. This is one extra question I have that I don't have on the list. If you had to suggest a book or two to people listening or myself, what book would you suggest? Or books?
The big ones for me have always been the Conversations with God trilogy, man, by Neil Donald Walsh. Those were, like I was telling you earlier, the Celestine Prophecy was sort of the first book that helped get me kind of going along this path, but Conversations with God had the most impact on my own way of thinking, really, I think. And even that I will qualify by saying that they just confirmed a lot of the things that I already thought. I found a lot of validation in that book, in those three books actually. But I would make those my picks for Deserted Island. Kind of, if all books on Earth were gone, which three would you save? I would say those three.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to give those a look over. Give them a read. I've got so much stuff on my reading list, but I definitely want to start checking out things other people suggest instead of mentally masturbating with all the choices I decide to pick.
Well, no, I hear you. I mean, that's kind of funny you said it like that, but I hear you though, because I'm really at that same place, man. I mean, I will make an effort to check out all these podcasts, watch all these movies, right, that people recommend, read all these books. But like you, I can only give my attention to so much in any given, 24-hour period. And I guess I'm thinking of what you said earlier, that really is the way I think. But whatever I'm meant to watch or read or hear, I will find my way to kind of naturally. So yeah, sure, I'll make an effort to, but I don't get too broken up if, someone recommends to me a book, especially because of what we said about books. You might tell me about a book, and I could read it now and not take away from it what it was supposed to, and then I'll do that 2 years from now. Who knows? You know what I mean?
Hmm. No, that's a really good point too. Maybe if I like if I went out and bought those books right now and I read them, I wouldn't get the same thing that I would if I read them when I actually get around to reading them.
Yes,
Really cool
exactly. So
perspective.
yeah. So I would recommend that you read them, but you will read them when it's your time, right? So yeah.
I totally get it. So do you have any links or anything like that that you want me to share in the description below, or?
Yeah, I would say my SoundCloud page, just so people can check out. It's kind of like I was telling you earlier. There, people can check out tracks that I will be putting on, that I will be, uploading there. But it's all very much work slowly in progress. So
Mhm.
everyone can just go to soundcloud.com/Dalien8. That's my name, DALIEN 8, and the number 8, and that's just my profile on SoundCloud. I currently have 4 tracks of my own there, but people can also just see what music I'm into that I'm sharing on SoundCloud. And that's pretty much it for now. Aside from that, it's just anything through the Positive Head podcast that you might hear about, because, Brandon will name drop me once in a while, and, one of the other listeners will comment on me. And I may actually do what we're doing here now and go on and chat with him sometime in the near future. But if so, we'll figure that out when we get there. So yeah.
Awesome, man. And you had said before you might be thinking about doing a podcast of your own. Do you have any
Yes,
timeline on when that might be?
I don't, but let's say that here in the next 6 months, roughly, just to kind of give a very loose ballpark, I will be making, I guess, the announcement. And if so, of course, I would be glad to reach out to the Spiritual Phoenix family to kind of let them all know, right? Like I will reach out to Positive Head folks. But yeah, as of right now, all I can say is that there's the intention of doing something, and that's just about it for now. Just the intention. It should take shape in the next 6 months, but don't know yet. Don't know
Awesome,
when
man.
or if. Yeah.
I look forward to hearing it when you do get around to it, man. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to do this conversation. You're probably like only the third guy I've actually had on the podcast and talked to. I've had a lot of women on here, not to downplay them, but I don't get to talk to a lot of guys about these kind of topics. So it's really cool to be able to have like some guy time to talk about this stuff. I really appreciate your perspective. I want to thank you too for helping with the Positive Head podcast, because that's one of the things that has been such a great asset in my mental wellness kit, and it's something that really has propelled me to even be doing what I'm doing now. So just thanks, man, and
Thanks.
oh, you're totally welcome, bro. You absolutely deserve all that praise. And I've asked people to kind of close out on their own way before. So if you have like a closing thing you want to leave listeners with, the floor is open for you.
Cool. Well, thanks for that. I will actually. Maybe I was going to say something else, but what you just said now is a pretty good way to close it off. Because yeah, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you. These conversations are actually not really only a lot of fun, but also kind of therapeutic in a way, right? Because they help me in a sense, and like we were saying, I know that they help a lot of people who listen to them. And I have to just take the praise you gave me and redirect it towards Brandon, and I will acknowledge some praise, but it's really been the opportunity that he gave me that was an unexpectedly awesome privilege, man. That's the way that I can think of it now, because I am indirectly helping touch the lives of a lot of people through the work I'm doing for him or with him, right? And even beyond anything that I can do with my own podcast, which I think would be awesome, and what you're doing with your podcast, which again, you are unique, so your voice is going to add to Brandon's and to everyone else's. But yeah, it's just something that it really is kind of an unexpected privilege that, and 2-3 years ago I couldn't even have really understood, but now I'm kind of beginning to appreciate. So thanks to all of you for the chance.
Don't believe. Don't follow. Do not consume. Do not watch. Largely what I'm talking about here is reclaiming experience. This is what's been taken from us. It's a self-advancing, self-expanding, self-defining process, and it takes no prisoners.
The real world isn't a spiritual world, it isn't a material world, it isn't an empty world, it isn't a solid world. It's simply